Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Z. Welcome to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. Today, I am talking all about couples therapy with a partner who has narcissistic abuse and all the reasons why I do not recommend it. This is an episode that's extremely important. It's something that I get asked about a ton. I think you will find it very helpful and very useful. And if you find yourself in this situation in couples therapy where it's not working, this episode is for you. Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Z, and welcome to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. Today, we are talking about couples therapy. Why are we talking about couples therapy? Because couples therapy takes on a very unique role when you're dealing with a narcissistic partner. And this also applies to family members as well. But for the purposes of this episode, I'm going to focus on an intimate partner who has narcissistic personality disorder. So oftentimes when I get clients referred to me, they are coming to me, or I should say one person is coming to me, usually the significant other of the narcissistic partner. And one of the things that is a pattern that I hear all the time is how they tried couples therapy and it never worked, or that they had been through numerous couples therapists, but none of them worked. Or they hated all the therapists, but then my significant other picked a therapist, but I didn't feel comfortable and I didn't like that therapist. And I feel like the therapist wasn't listening to me, didn't hear me, and quote, I kid you not, sided with the narcissist. So I get these questions all the time. And so I really think it's an important episode to have. So I'm going to go through the reasons why, I would say rarely, but I'd be lying. The reasons why I never refer anybody to couples therapy if their partner is a narcissist. So there's probably about 8 solid reasons why, and I'm going to go through each of them. But let's start with the most common and also the most shocking to some people and the most unfortunate reason why I never refer. And that's because the majority of therapists, whether they are therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, it doesn't matter. The majority of them are not well versed in narcissistic personality disorder. Not that they don't know what it is, and not that they don't know the clinical diagnosis or the clinical, I should say, diagnostic criteria. They do. But the diagnostic criteria looks very different written on the DSM versus what it looks like in real life relationships. And the majority of therapists, unfortunately, are not well versed in the subtleties and the nuances of coercive control, in the subtleties and the nuances of narcissistic abuse, psychological abuse, emotional abuse, all of that, all of the unseen abuse. And while it's out there and it's definitely a topic that is more well known now, it still does not mean that therapists are well versed in it. The best example I can give you is this. Do I understand what eating disorders are? Absolutely. Do I understand the clinical criteria for anorexia? Absolutely. For bulimia? Absolutely. Do I feel comfortable and competent to treat it? Absolutely not. I refer out. Hands down, refer out. Because I know what I don't know. The problem with narcissistic personality disorder is that it's not necessarily something that's always so visible in the couples therapy session, especially when one partner, the healthy partner, doesn't know that what they're dealing with is narcissistic personality disorder, which is often a lot of the time. So you have this couple come into couples therapy and usually get something like this. We're not communicating, we're fighting. The narcissist will say, she doesn't listen to me or he doesn't listen to me. They won't be intimate with me anymore. They don't care about me. They won't try to make this work. Everything I do is wrong. And so the therapist may not pick up on the nuances of the gaslighting that's going on in the session, may not pick up on the nuances of the emotional abuse, of the coercive control that's going on in the session. And it's missed. And here's why therapists are not well versed in this. Many, many moons ago, when I was in graduate school, we maybe talked about borderline personality disorder in graduate school. I don't think we spent more than, I don't know, maybe a week, if that, on narcissistic personality disorder in any of my doctoral classes. And I would bet the majority of people in my cohort would agree with me on this. Clinically, I knew all the criteria, but I had no idea about the subtleties of coercive control, of financial abuse, of emotional abuse, psychological abuse. I had no idea about the blueprint of narcissistic behavior. I just knew the diagnostic criteria. And so I think that's usually where it stops. And unfortunately, it's overlooked a lot. Now, however, which is growing more and more, which is amazing, is that there's so much out there now that a lot of specialists in narcissistic personality disorder, like myself and other colleagues that I work with, do empirically supported trainings for other clinicians so that other clinicians can see the symptoms, can see the behaviors in session and know what to look for and either treat it themselves or refer out. So that is happening, and that's a huge, huge improvement from where we were, let's say, 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. So there's a lot of training that is out there now with competent clinicians who know what they're talking about, who are able to kind of increase the knowledge base of other therapists. And I can't fault them. It's not really, it's not necessarily something that you think to specialize in. But when this is all you do, picking out the symptoms becomes very clear, right? And it's very obvious, but not for somebody who doesn't work in this field. So that being said, that brings on a whole host of issues. And the first is this. We know that those with narcissistic personality disorder can be extremely charming. And what happens is the therapy session becomes a stage, much like family court. The therapy session becomes a stage or a platform for the narcissist to perform, to charm the therapist, to win them over. And if you don't know what to look for, a therapist may look at that behavior as, they really love you. They really seem to care about you. They really want this to work. They're really working hard for this. It doesn't seem like you want this to work. And so the non-narcissist is sitting there going, wait, what is happening? What is happening? How is this happening? And so they're repeatedly being gaslit, and it's not on purpose by the therapist, obviously, but the narcissist knows exactly what they're doing. But the therapist, by not seeing what's happening, unintentionally re-traumatizes the patient, unintentionally gaslights the patient, the healthy patient, not the narcissist. Things like, they really seem like they love you and they want this to work. Do you want your marriage to work? I don't know. You don't seem like you're all in, let's say. So, what's holding you back from connecting with your partner? I've heard that one a lot. What is holding you back from connecting with your partner? What brought you two together in the first place? And so for the person who's being abused, sitting there going, what brought us together in the first place? They faked who they were. I was love bombed. I was tricked. This is a facade. This is not who they really are. But they're not going to say that in the therapy session. And I'm going to get to why they don't say that. So you have a therapist who is a mental health professional who you are paying to help you. And you are going in already confused, already with such low self-esteem, already with such severe doubt about your reality, or I'm sorry, your perception of your reality. So you already question if there really is abuse or if you're crazy. Is it really that bad, or am I overreacting? And then you go into a therapy session where you have the therapist saying to you, what's holding you back from connecting with them? Because it really seems like they love you and they really want this to work. And you're just sitting there going, what? Maybe it is me. I guess it is me. Maybe it isn't that bad. Maybe I deserve it. I mean, all of these things. I've heard all of these things. And it's really, really traumatizing because you're going thinking you're going to get help and you don't. And it makes it that much worse. And then because the narcissist is now winning over the therapist, and this is their stage and their platform, and therapy becomes another tool in which the narcissist can now manipulate you even further and use the therapy speak that they learn against you. Use use the things you say in therapy against you. Tell the therapist what, quote, happened over the week and bring it up in session when what happened over the week was you started hysterical crying, let's say, and panicking and having a panic attack because they were verbally or emotionally abusing you. And they come in and say, she's so anxious or he's so anxious. She had a panic attack and I couldn't calm her down. And I tried everything and I don't know where this is coming from. And her anxiety is really interfering in our marriage. And again, you're sitting there going, what? Like, was my reaction that bad? Maybe it was that. And so it ends up being this big toxic cycle. And therapy ends up being another manipulative tool for the narcissist to use to gaslight and confuse the hell out of you. So, what ends up happening after that is that you get to a point where, now you have to remember, when you're going into couples therapy, let's say with a narcissist, it's usually because either they got caught doing something, so they say, okay, let's go to couples therapy, I'm going to change, I promise. Or it's you may be giving an ultimatum, if you don't go to couples therapy, I'm going to leave you. And maybe that'll look bad for them, or they want to try to manipulate you to stay. I mean, there's a million different reasons. But I can tell you this, that the reason for the narcissist to go to couples therapy is not because they want to change. It is not because they want to make things work. They don't. In fact, they don't want anything to change because they like where they have you. They like that they have control over you. They don't want you setting boundaries. They don't want you setting limits. They don't want you to see what they're really like. They don't want you to figure out their blueprint because then they lose control over you. So their goal of couples therapy is not what you and I would think a traditional goal of couples therapy is, which is to figure out better communication, to make the relationship stronger, or to talk about how certain things are affecting your relationship, or to separate, but separate in a healthy way. But all of those reasons feed into wanting to be better and do better. With a narcissist, that is not the case, and it is never going to be the case. I'm making a blanket statement. They don't want to change, and they will not change. Now, how do you know? Here's the difference. Somebody with toxic patterns, and I've said this a million times for those who've listened to previous episodes or listened to me on Instagram. On the surface, somebody with toxic patterns can look identical to the behaviors of a narcissist. On the surface, the behaviors look exactly the same. They both look extremely toxic. What's different is the underlying function and the ability for the person, and the willingness of the person to take accountability for their actions. For example, if somebody's engaging in very toxic interpersonal style, let's say that every time a problem comes up, they shut down, they cut their partner off, they withdraw, they want nothing to do with their partner, and they just sit and they isolate, and it's affecting the relationship. That person may be engaging in those patterns because they've always engaged in those patterns because that's what they were taught or that's what they did growing up to protect themselves. They know it's not healthy. And when you tell them that those patterns of behavior hurt you, they have empathy and they have remorse. They don't want to hurt you. Now, does that mean that they're going to immediately change? No, because change is hard even when the patterns are uncomfortable, right? Because we gravitate towards what's familiar. It makes us feel comfortable. even if it's unhealthy. But if you tell somebody who has toxic patterns but is not a narcissist that their behavior is hurting you, they're going to move forward and try to fix it as best they can. They don't want to hurt you. That's not their intention. With a narcissist, those toxic behaviors, they are deliberate. They are purposeful. When you tell them that they are hurting you, they're not going to change it. It benefits them for whatever the reason. So that's the difference, the underlying function. A narcissist, if they're going to couples therapy, it is not to change. It is either to look good for maybe courts, the lawyers, look good for their family, look good in front of their kids, look like they're the good person in this, making an effort so that the other person looks bad, like they're not making an effort. So generally speaking, if somebody with narcissistic personality disorder does go to therapy and that therapist is able to pick up on the coercive control in session and pick up on the blueprint of narcissistic abuse in that session or suspected narcissistic abuse, I guarantee you that the narcissist, as soon as they realize that they cannot charm the therapist anymore, as soon as they realize the therapist is onto them and onto their behaviors and is going in the direction of breaking down their behaviors and discussing the consequences of their actions, that person, the narcissist, will either stand up and storm out, which I've had many times happen, or they'll tell their significant other, I am never going back to her. She is a complete and total moron. She doesn't know what the hell she's talking about. We're done with her. I'm picking the therapist. And so you have the narcissist pick a therapist. And what type of therapist do you think the narcissist is going to pick? They're going to pick somebody who they benefit from. They're going to pick somebody who believes their story, who buys into their narrative, who does not view their behavior as abusive or coercively controlling, but instead views the healthy partner's reaction to the abuse as the problem. They're going to look at the healthy partner's reaction to the abuse as the problem. So it's common for a narcissist to stay in therapy if the therapist is siding with them and buys into their narrative. But they're not staying because they want to change. They're not staying because they're taking accountability for their actions. They're staying because it benefits them. And usually the benefit is yet another way, another avenue, another way to manipulate and control and scare their partner into staying in the relationship, or gain control over the narrative, or gain power over them. It's not to change. It just isn't. Here's the other thing that happens. So imagine this. Day in and day out, you are emotionally, psychologically, maybe physically, maybe sexually abused by your partner for years. Years. And now, either your partner, the narcissistic partner, for whatever their reason, suggests couples therapy, or you suggest couples therapy because you don't know what else to do. And you go to therapy, and the therapist says, tell me why you're here. And you may say something very benign, like, we don't get along or we're not communicating. And then the therapist asks you for examples. So here you are in an office with your narcissistic partner and a therapist who doesn't know the backstory yet. And they're asking you for examples of why the two of you aren't getting along. I can tell you this right now. The majority of people are not going to speak their truth. Why won't they speak their truth in the therapy session? Because that person knows that if they talk about the abuse, if they even hint at the abuse, that car ride home with the narcissist, that night home with the narcissist is going to be extremely toxic, abusive, and can even be dangerous. So people often say, well, why didn't you bring it up in therapy? Why don't you talk to a therapist about this? This is why. Because if you say, my partner emotionally abuses me, physically assaults me, and sexually abuses me, coerces me into having intimate relationships with them when I don't want to, and I tell them I don't want to, but they force me to, or they'll do X, Y, and Z to me, or they're physically abusive, whatever they say, or they're financially abusive, there's consequences. They've learned over time that if they speak about the abuse, there are consequences, and those consequences are scary. This is why people can't just leave. They are petrified. And talking about the abuse and leaving the relationship puts a person at a very high risk for increased physical violence. So not only are they not going to speak their truth because they're scared, not only are they going to not speak their truth because they've been gaslit for years into believing a narrative that describes them as crazy, as overreacting, as dramatic, as depressed and anxious, and always argumentative and difficult. You've believed that over time. So not only are you scared to speak your truth because of the repercussions after the therapy session's over, but you don't even know your truth anymore. You're so confused that you can't think straight. So those two things together make it really difficult for somebody to speak their truth if they're being abused. Here's the other part, and this is the part that, there's certain things, I always say, there's certain things that, as a psychologist who specializes in narcissistic abuse, there's a few things that really just hit me hard and really just, you know, just just still to this day, just either makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up or just makes me really upset. And this is one of the ones that makes me really upset. So I've had this happen to so many clients, and it's so heartbreaking. They'll go to therapy with the narcissist, couples therapy. The therapist is not well versed in coercive control, can't identify it, can't figure it out, doesn't know what to look for, misses the subtleties, misses the cues, and looks at the couple as one person, the narcissist, wants to make it work so bad. And then the person who's being abused is withdrawn or not putting in effort or is, being the quote difficult one, however they want to view it. But it's typically viewed like that. The therapeutic advice that is then given are things to bring the couple closer together. When you're telling somebody who is emotionally, psychologically, physically, financially, sexually abused, that the way to solve this is to bring them closer together, one, it totally removes the accountability of the narcissist for the abuse. And two, it continues to gaslight you. So the therapist unknowingly puts you in an even more dangerous situation because now they're saying, this is how you communicate better. You have to talk to each other about how you feel. I mean, have you guys ever tried to tell a narcissist how you feel? That doesn't work out so well. It's minimized, it's dismissed, it results in rage episodes. I mean, that's not what you do. That's not how you, quote, argue with a narcissist. What you do is you remain neutral. What you do is set a boundary. What you do is not respond with emotion. But now you have a therapist telling you that the way to heal this situation is to communicate more, is to spend more time together, is to go on date nights. And so you have the narcissist saying, I would love to go on a date night. I would love to be intimate with my partner again, but they don't ever want to. So now you have the person who's being abused sitting there having to be told that they should get a sitter and go out on date night, which involves driving in the car with the narcissist, let's say going to dinner, having them drink, driving home, I'm sure an argument, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, and then sometimes therapists will suggest scheduling a night where you can be intimate with each other. So now you're telling somebody who's, let's say, being sexually abused, because this happens more than you know, and just because two people are married does not mean sexual coercion does not happen. It does, and it happens often in narcissistic abusive relationships. Now you're being told to schedule intimate time, or to even make time to be intimate with your partner. Do you know how confusing that is to somebody who's being sexually abused or emotionally abused? It literally strips them even further of their core sense of self and their dignity almost. So now they feel like it's their fault, and in order to now appease the therapist and to make it look like they are trying in therapy, now they have to go on date night, or they have to be intimate with their partner. Or I shouldn't say have to, but that should be a focus, that they should try to figure out how to be intimate again together. I mean, I hear this all the time. And then narcissists will come back in and say, I tried to go on date and I tried to be intimate, but they didn't want to again. And then the therapist says, it doesn't seem like you want to make this work. What's blocking you from making this work? And again, they're not going to say, because I'm being abused, because they have to leave and drive home and live with this person. So therapy becomes a very toxic situation if you are with a couples therapist who does not understand the nuances. Here's the only benefit. This is the only benefit of couples therapy. And I would never refer for this reason, because this is something I would have told them beforehand, or told the patient beforehand. But the only benefit to couples therapy with a narcissistic partner, or even a family member, is if you're going to a therapist that understands and is able to work with the person who's being abused. The only benefit is if they understand what's happening in front of them, and they use that information to gently call out the narcissist for the narcissistic behavior. They're obviously not going to point fingers and say, you have narcissistic personality disorder, blah, blah, blah. That's not going to. They're going to gently call out, or at least they should, gently call out the patterns of behavior. Because patterns of behavior are patterns of behavior. They are facts. You can't argue them. So what they would do is call out the patterns of behavior. Now, the person who's being abused, who's in that session, is probably going to sit there and say, oh my God, they get it. And this huge wave of relief, at least temporarily, is going to wash over them, because now somebody sees them, somebody hears them, they're not crazy, somebody's validating them, validating everything that they've been thinking, or validating and making clear things that they've been confused about. That's the only benefit. But here's where that goes wrong. If this occurs, if you see a therapist that understands coercive control and understands narcissistic abuse, and they start to call out, bring to light the patterns of abuse in the session, or the blueprint of the narcissistic personality behavior that they're saying, guess what happens? The narcissistic partner is either going to storm out, get extremely defensive, and they are never coming back. I'm not going to see Dr. Z. She doesn't know what the hell she's talking about. She's, whatever. She's terrible. She's horrible. I'm going to write her a horrible review. She's only in it for the money. I mean, I've heard it all. They're going to say whatever they need to say to not go back, and they're not going to go back. And then what happens is they say to their partner, if you want to go to couples therapy so badly, I'm picking the therapist. And they'll pick a therapist, but they will pick somebody they can charm, and then you're back to square one. And so this is why there's always so many therapists. By the time people come to me, they're like, I've been to this therapist, and nothing works. And that's because you're going about it in the wrong way, with, unfortunately, therapists who are missing this. And this is a big issue that a lot of people who work in this field see. And it's unfortunate, because now it's exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting to continuously go to new therapists, to have to retell your story, to have to get familiar again, get comfortable with a new person. It is really taxing and really emotionally draining, not to mention financially draining. Therapy can be expensive. And so it's like, do you really want to seek out another couples therapist and have to retell all this again and spend all this money again if it's not working? So my advice to you is this. Number one, I wouldn't focus on couples therapy because the narcissist is not going to make any change. And the likelihood of them making even the smallest change is so tiny. And then for them to maintain that change after therapy is even more of a leap. So if you find yourself in this situation, my advice to you is 100% do individual therapy for yourself. How to set boundaries in the relationship, how to leave the relationship, how to manage the abuse that's coming your way, how to keep yourself safe, all of that. You need individual therapy. Couples therapy, I'm saying it now, should not be on the radar. It just should not be. It can be more detrimental than it is helpful if you don't find somebody who gets it. And even if you do find somebody who gets it, because they get it, the narcissist is not going to go back to them. There's no way. So it is best, and my recommendation is for you to seek individual therapy. Because even the best therapists who understand this, the narcissist is not going to go back to them. So it ends up being a real emotionally exhausting and financially exhausting and cognitively exhausting experience. Not to mention it can be dangerous. If you speak your truth in that session and you have to drive home with them, or you have to live with them, or you have kids with them, they have control over your finances, that can end up really bad. And there's consequences. And how do you know that? Because you've experienced them. Which is why it becomes very difficult to leave, which is why individual therapy is so important, because in those therapy sessions with someone who understands coercive control, they can help you develop and formulate a plan, not just to set boundaries, but an exit strategy or how to navigate a relationship that you can't break free from, but at least you can keep yourself safe in. So that's the most important part, is individual therapy. That's it, and that's all. So for those of you who are listening saying, okay, well, how do I find somebody who understands our personality disorder? You can look, I hate saying on Instagram, but on social media, there are certain therapists that are extremely qualified who do this all day long. And I'm happy to share those referrals with you. You can always email my office at info@drjamiezuckerman.com. I take on individual coaching clients to help them through this. Again, you can go to my website, drjamiezuckerman.com, or email info@drjamiezuckerman.com to schedule an appointment. But this really is your best bet over couples therapy. I cannot stress that enough. Yeah. And so, like I said, if you're in couples therapy and you feel like you're going crazy and you're doubting yourself even more, you're not crazy. That's kind of exactly what's happening. So again, like I said, the only benefit is that sometimes they will validate how you feel, let you know you're not crazy, and maybe give you the strength to start the process of leaving. But my best piece of advice is get individual therapy. So that's all I have for today. I hope that was helpful. I know it was a lot of information, but it's a super important topic. All right, I hope everybody has a great day, and I will talk to you next time on Next Up Narcissism. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Next Up Narcissism. I hope you found it useful, but most importantly, I hope you found it validating. Want to work one-on-one with me? Visit my website at drjamiezuckerman.com to book a personalized coaching session, and be sure to check out my on-demand workshops on topics like co-parenting with a narcissist, life after leaving, anxiety management strategies, and more. Again, that's drjamiezuckerman.com. You'll also find links to my interactive workbooks, merchandise, resources, and newsletter sign-up. Next Up Narcissism is as much your podcast as it is mine. I want to hear your feedback and what you want to hear. So make sure to leave a podcast review wherever you listen, or send an email to nextup@drjamiezuckerman.com. Again, that's nextup
at drjamiezuckerman.com. Be sure to subscribe so that you never miss an episode. And as always, thank you so much for listening. Make sure to tune in next week to see what's up next on Next Up Narcissism.